Welcome back to the Fire Break. I'm Steve Wolf. As you know, the Fire Break is sponsored by Team Wildfire, developing innovative technology for pushing back wildfires. Wildfires is something that my guest, Rachelle Wilson, knows a lot about. And she's very shy, so we're going to really have to bring, this out of her. Rachelle has really some really great insights on WUI strategic planning and the fundraising that's necessary to bring those plans to life. Rachelle, welcome to the Fire Break. How are you today?
Thanks, Steve. I'm doing well. I'm really excited to be here today and to have the opportunity to nerd out about wildfire.
Awesome. All right. So, when I talked to you about coming on the podcast, you seemed pretty eager because you have a lot of opinions that you want to share about wildfire. And that was really exciting to me because, I want to hear wildfire opinions. And we need a lot of opinions if we're going to come up with a couple that are actually, implementable. So,
yeah.
So how do you feel like your wildfire strategy opinions differ from what we hear out there commonly?
Well, and thank you for that introduction. I do kind of feel like I have maybe a different perspective because I kind of stumbled into everything. It began with taking the basic S130, 190, L180 courses with my high school students at the time. I was a teacher.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was working in Crestone, Colorado, and that school had a really cool outdoor education component to it.
Okay.
And through that, we were able to do cool trips like that. So we got certified on a piece of private land, like a couple of miles north of the Great Sand Dunes. Like, it was just a really cool trip. And I caught the fire bug from there. So when I joined the local volunteer department, they already had a grant for hazardous fuels reduction. And half of it was for open space and the other half was for defensible lots.
Okay.
Or defensible spaces on private lots. And because they already had the grant, I kind of had to start backwards with the monitoring, tracking, reporting. And because I was also doing fuels management eventually in the field with them, I got my S212 and, was doing the actual work that it takes to make a more fire adapted or resilience landscape. And through that work, I was able to come up with like really efficient tracking methods and working with the crews and troubleshooting all of that. And so that, I think, really helps on the implementation piece. And then we were able to secure a FEMA FS&P grant to continue that work. So being in the field and having taken those essential like wildfire classes gave me some insight on the fire science and fire behavior, slope, fuels, topography, and weather, all of that. It helped me write those proposals that, were selected for funding. But this was kind of back in 2019, 2020, before we really kind of started seeing the conversation about wildfire take off. And so there wasn't a lot available. Like, there weren't a lot of podcasts you could find or research articles or resources. And that was kind of concerning because I was hearing from those firefighters and observing myself in fire that the situation was becoming more critical. And this was, only a couple of years after the Camp Fire.
I see.
So I started really researching as much as I could, reading as much as I could. My personal favorite fire movie is Bring Your Own Brigade by Lucy Walker.
Okay.
Because I think that really does a good job of telling kind of all of the complexities of the stories, so it's not just that wildfire is becoming bigger, it's becoming more intense because of X, Y, and Z. And that can include an increased presence in logging activity. When you look at Butte County, a lot of that land is owned by Sierra Pacific, where they have heavy logging practices. The campfire ignited under a transmission line, and it was found in like the legal documents that the hook that was responsible was an original hook from like 1919.
Wow.
So yeah, like
kudos to long service life on that equipment though.
Yeah. And after that incident, PG&E had to do like a survey of where those faults would be in other transmission lines. And I want to say the statistic was like over 250,000 were found that needed to be replaced. So when you look at something like that, the infrastructure that needs to be replaced, the amount of fuels that need to be reduced and or treated, it is overwhelming because there's so much of it, right? And at the same time, if you're paying attention to the workforce issue, my concern is like, we're not paying enough attention to that, because the people that can do the jobs, that can do the fuels management, that can, repair those lines, those workforces are in a huge shortage. And I'm not sure as much about like the linemen, but I know for wildland firefighters, it doesn't feel like we're doing enough to keep them incentivized to stay.
Well, we're not. Yeah.
So
low pay, long hours, and terrible work conditions.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And that's a recipe for a 20-year-old or something, but not, a career firefighter.
Right. And I think coming from education, what I am kind of seeing is I feel like in wildfire, we're at the No Child Left Behind moment.
Yes.
Where the policies and the legislation that are being made are going to really have a huge impact on the future of the industry and our ability to implement the plans that we have in place. Because, and I'll give you an example. I have a project I'm working on for funding out of California, trying to get a eucalyptus grove reduced. And I can't get it done for like less than $2 million right now. Like I'm having a hard...
You're bringing in panda bears to eat them? Is that the idea?
Right? That might be a better way, actually. I haven't even thought about that.
They'll do it.
Yeah. But that...
Koala bears, right? They like eucalyptus,
Some kind of like the goats for the vegetation management. I love that.
Tell me about the No Child Left Behind comparison, because in my own experience it was really more of a no child gets ahead, right? It was about uniformity rather than quality.
Yes, exactly.
But a classroom cannot advance beyond the pace of the slowest learner, which of course is like an ADHD death sentence for the students who want to push ahead.
Exactly. Well, and I think especially when you look at who your potential firefighters are, they're those kids.
Yes.
But I think that when we incentivized standardized testing and pushed that, and that uniformity, that one size fits all approach, it really set students up who were neurodivergent or couldn't just sit in a classroom for 8 hours and take a test, we set them up for failure, and we didn't give them any post-secondary readiness options that were really set on helping them succeed in that world, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
Like the CTE programs when I was growing up, they were for like the bad kids or the kids who didn't have options. And I've spoken to a lot of female firefighters my own age, who said, I wish I would have known this was a career option when I was in high school.
Oh, interesting. So
and
right. They say like kids, have a pretty good idea what they're going to do by 8th grade. So there really needs to be early, programs, you're saying, right? If we want to get kids into the fire service or, interested in WUI related activities.
Yeah, exactly. And that is kind of really where my focus kind of landed once I really wrapped my head around everything, was not just that we needed to develop this workforce starting at a younger age, because kids just don't know about it. It was kind of this niche thing under the Forest Service for a long time. But now, I think especially after the last couple of years, like, I don't think there's really any place that is safe from wildland or vegetation fire. And so
that's right. Yeah. There's only two kinds of places on Earth, right? Places that are burning and places that are going to burn.
Yes. And I don't know if you've read Fire Weather.
Yes.
Yeah.
A great book.
And like in the very first page, a couple pages, he talks about how we are like the only planet that has like fire, that element of fire. And so I really liked, I know that
oxygen, which is not a bad thing.
Yeah. I really liked the term fire dependent that was being thrown around for a while. I haven't seen it in a while, so I don't know if we're still on resilience or land or adapted, but I really think fire dependent or even like fire empowered.
Fired
are
up.
Better ways of looking at it.
Yeah, right. When we talk about like the boreal forest that, can't regenerate without fire.
Right. Ponderosas. Yeah.
All right. So we need a workforce.
Yeah,
We're not doing anything to adapt to get one.
Right.
And then to what degree do you think it's a workforce issue versus, a technology issue? Because if I were to make the comparison in the energy world, we'd say, the reason there's not enough electricity is because we don't have enough coal miners. Okay, you could look at it as a workforce issue like that, or you could say, well, maybe, mining coal isn't really how we should be doing this. And I wonder, maybe running around with, Pulaskis and axes and other, medieval gardening tools is maybe not like the ultimate way, to control fire.
Well, and I think that's where the narrative needs to change a bit, because we think of, they are only suppressing fire.
Right.
And that's such a small percentage of what actually goes on. So, for example, the biggest thing is evacuation. We need wildland, our firefighters in general, to be able to evacuate, because what I've kind of noticed in grants, because I've extended to like other environmental and hazard mitigation grants, and we planned communities, a long time ago, like back in the 60s, 50s, when we were developing these areas, we planned them without the knowledge of sea level rising or wildfire.
Right.
And so here we are all this time later trying to figure out how to change that and how to make those places safer, how to make the areas we've already built safer. And we don't have enough time. There's not enough technology or money to truly make those places safer in the time we need it. So
Okay.
we still need firefighters. And I'll give you a concrete example from the mountain fire. The first responders, the first place they actually went was the elderly and assisted living homes, which was a huge victory in my eyes because 86% of the victims from the campfire were over the age of 60. And like some 30% had limited mobility. And so that response is like a lesson learned from life lost. And that was a pretty cool victory. But because they had to focus on that, there were a lot of early home ignitions that started that could have been maybe mitigated, and it could have possibly decreased the amount of damage that came from that fire, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does.
So why the workforce issue is important is because these fires are moving so fast, you have to prioritize life or structure because these homes aren't retrofit the way they need to be.
Right.
And the fuels management isn't there. So like when you talk about fuels reduction and the debate that is encompassing that, it's like, well, we only have statistics for counties like Butte County that have that heavy logging presence. But for those areas that don't have that, those just basic residential areas that have some overgrown forests, those strategic fuel breaks are going to be huge for evacuation and like calming that fire down.
Yes. So there's so many things to be done labor-wise with regard to, fuels reduction, retrofitting, evacuation route planning, evacuations themselves. This seems like a lot of diverse skills to lump all under the title of firefighter. Right?
And that's
Could one not be, a fuels reduction specialist without being a firefighter, or, an evacuation route, whatever? Like, can there be other jobs where we're not taking this very, very limited number of firefighters and asking them to do all these other things that are unrelated to suppression?
well, and that's actually a great question, because that's where that workforce development conversation and where the technology conversation comes in. Like, it's easier to be a wildfire planner with the assistance of technology than it is to be able to reduce the fuels or like do that evacuation piece. But the way that the wildfire infrastructure is set up is, unless you're on a department, a structure department, career department with a wildland division, you work when the fires are burning, and then you're struggling in the off season. So things like that hazardous fuels removal, which the recommended time usually according to FEMA for that is like September through March, with environmental constrictions and such. So while the wildland firefighters aren't off fighting fires, they can be doing those community fuels reduction pieces. They need like an S212 and they can start felling, but they don't even need very many qualifications to be able to do something like swamp, or, if you're doing a chipper operation. And then they can also do code enforcement, which has been huge in, like Butte County. I'm seeing a lot more counties in California including that in their services. So those are like things that firefighters can take on. But like the prevention and the planning piece, that still can be done with technology and by other people, new people coming into the workforce. But we're going to save a lot of time if we talk to the firefighters as well. There's a big conversation about what the SVI is, and nobody knows your social vulnerabilities in a community like the fire department, because they have to constantly respond to those calls.
So you're thinking that if we could cross-train firefighters into allied aspects of fire management, then they could have a full-time job year-round, and then it would be easier to recruit career wildland firefighters than just working off of a seasonal, like a basketball pickup game.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a need for training, right? Like throughout all of this. And coming from the education world, like policies are better made by people who have been in the classroom, even if it's like for a year. Because you know those obstacles of implementation.
Yeah.
And there seems to be like some tension between the prevention planning and suppression, just based on conversations I've had, and then things that I'm not seeing in conversations. I'm not hearing a lot about how are we supporting firefighters. So if we could bring those two worlds together and get a little more cohesion and help, like we have some really brilliant minds in the planning and prevention world, like help get those firefighters year-round jobs so you have like your best asset, you have a way to get those projects implemented. Oh, go ahead.
No. Well, you said if we could get that, and I know you're not a person to sit around and if, right? What's the plan?
So that's again why I ended up really going to building like it's called an alternative career pathway.
Okay.
And it is meant for high schoolers, but there is, a possible collaboration happening where it might be implemented at the college level as well, which would be great too. We need to open it up to everyone. But in seeing that, college attendance rates are declining like they are, there's a need for more of these alternative career pathways. So I hit up a former superintendent of mine, Christina, who has been helping me kind of shape the curriculum and approach. And it's exciting because it's needed, but it's also like trying to find that home. So we've got a program that would allow students to graduate as a wildland firefighter type 2.
Okay.
That was kind of the essentials of the program at first. But then in realizing that broader conversation, we've also included a community risk reduction. So we're exposing kids to all components of the WUI. And I know some people are like, I don't really like the WUI term, but it's like, it's a good umbrella term right now for what we're trying to build. And when we look at cost effectiveness, something like a CWPP, it can be written at like a cheaper price if you do get that community involvement. So if you've got our program where in the second semester, which focuses on community risk reductions, students have to plan, organize, and implement a community outreach day. My thinking behind that is like just working and growing up in rural areas. I know that that conversation for mitigation can be kind of contentious, but if you have it at that community level where the kids are having it, because a rural community or any community is much more likely to show up for something that is youth driven. So it's starting that conversation in a more like non-threatening, safe way.
It's
And
for the
it's,
children, right?
yeah, it
By
is.
the
Yeah.
for the children, by the children, really.
Yeah.
I mean, as it should be. Like you know, we'll be checking out of here in the next few decades, and the kids are the ones who are going to inherit whatever this mess looks like. And I agree with you that we have an obligation to equip them to deal with the problems that we're leaving them to resolve.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I love your idea though of being of a kid graduating high school and they've got their Wildland Firefighter 2 certification. Maybe they got their EMT card. They have some background in community risk reduction. This is really like what we would call a major in college, right? But it's a major that you achieve while you're in high school in emergency preparedness and response.
Yeah. Exactly. And
I
it's
mean, what kid wouldn't want that?
right, right. Well, and I think it's going to be more attractive again to those kids who are going to be naturally attracted to the job. But that community risk reduction piece also gives them a chance to take some leadership and responsibility within their community, which can really like boost their confidence and self-esteem. And what I keep hearing from people I talk to in some of these rural communities are, we need options for our students that are here. They
Right.
don't they might not want to leave. They might not want to go to college. So it's that idea of giving them that workforce opportunity, I think in any industry is something that we should all be looking at
Yeah.
to drive future workforce. But that difficulty is like, well, if can they stay in that community if that community has wildland capacity for them? And so where I think ultimately my vision differs is that I think we need to put maybe more focus on developing a holistic wildland workforce at the community level. Because we as planners, our funders, our whatever your title is in the wildfire world, there's still just not enough of us. But if we can start training communities and empowering them to handle their own wildfire problem, our state resources aren't going to be as stretched. Our federal resources aren't going to be as stretched.
You're
Utility.
talking about proactive measures
Yeah.
for cost reduction. Good luck
Yeah.
with that, Rachelle.
I know, right? That's why
Right.
I get so opinionated
No, I
sometimes.
know, right? There's no money for prevention and unlimited money for suppression. Right.
But it's the other way around now. So
It
that is
should be.
where
Yeah.
that's where I say we're at our no child left behind moment, because we
Okay.
either focus all the money in one space or the other. And it seems to depend on who has a lobbyist,
Uh-huh. Right.
and I say that very loosely. I'm learning more and more about lobbying in this, and I
My condolences.
thank you. It's a fun journey, but it's also frustrating because at the end of the day, I'm like, I just want to help like communities, kids, and firefighters. Really, kids and firefighters. Communities I can get frustrated with too.
So tell me about the CWPP grants. Just the idea that you have to apply for and get a grant to mitigate the fire risk in your community seems ridiculous, right? It seems like that should just something that is funded, just like traffic lights or bike lanes or whatever else they decide to fund. How could they not be funding, resilience of the WUI?
Yes. Oh, yes. And um, the funding is definitely interesting. Like again, that CWPP, I think if you created like a community fire safe council or fire smart, whatever you want to call it, you use your local resources, like to build that CWPP. And then that funding can go to something different, like fuels reduction. But writing a CWPP, like, get creative. Go ask your local biology teacher if he'll take his class out and identify combustible flora and fauna, and then put it in your CWPP. It is a community effort.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Right.
So things where we can save money and where we want to really focus. And I'll even admit, like, I, not being as technological savvy, I don't know all of the benefits to all of the different technologies. I get really excited when people talk to me. But there are also some things where I'm like, I don't know, I'm still not buying it.
Okay. Yeah, because technology has to be implemented and proven before you would look at it and say, yeah, that has value.
Well, or like I keep seeing articles that say, like, AI through wildfire sensors are like gonna save us from wildfire or whatever. Like, it's this big
AI can put out a fire, right?
Yes. And in every one of those articles, I'm like, wait a minute. Before you put that up, first check and see if there's a utility that doesn't already have 20 in the same area.
Right.
And B, make sure that there is actually someone who is contracted beyond October. Like, October is a huge, vulnerable October through, like, I would say, December even, because Marshall Fire was in December, right. Camp Fire in November. These mega fires are happening after that seasonal cutoff for federal and even state local contractors. So then you're leaving your community at the most vulnerable time with departments that don't have that wildfire capacity. Okay.
That sounds problematic.
Yeah, so that's kind of, I'm like, am I really that crazy? Or, it's in that, but I think, again, because I ultimately really stumbled into all of this and just trying to, like, help solve a bit of the problem, and through grant writing, I've seen a lot of the intersectionality. And so I think that, again, we really need to be talking to each other beyond our focused pathway, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So you want to get these programs going for students to be ready to get these jobs as wildland firefighters. And then how do you ensure that there is a paying job waiting for them at the other end of that career, of that education track?
Yeah, so it does seem it's like there's one obstacle after another, because a lot of firefighters will either leave the federal or local state agencies. Like, when you are a hot shot and you are doing the worst of the work, the hardest of the work, for like $16 an hour. Right. And you have to work 1,000 hours of overtime to justify your season.
Yep.
Or you can go into the contract world where you're not as up close and personal, not as in much danger, and you're starting out as a wildland firefighter type 2 making $26 an hour.
Right.
But with hotshot credentials,
barely more than McDonald's pays, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So interestingly enough, the department I came up in was privately owned by a POA. And so they had the Property Owners Association.
Okay.
Which property owners association and homeowners associations are eligible for a lot of grants for wildfire prevention.
I did not know that.
Yeah, very important to know.
Okay. What size are these grants? Like, are they big enough to do something meaningful?
Yeah. I mean, that private department, I think when I totaled it all up, it was like close to $1 million in funding that I got them So
Wow.
yeah.
Okay.
And that, half of that was for fuels reduction. So those areas have a lot more room for growth than they realize. And so we would do fuels reduction in the off season, so from like September to March, and then that department would respond to national assignments. So
Okay.
that is how you make it sustainable until we can figure out a way to make it like kind of this fully operational workforce, But that pathway does work. And there were a lot of really cool benefits that came out of it. Like the fuels that we reduced, we were also able to give away to the community as firewood. And we measured that volume and used it as in-kind match. So we were able to get grant funds where we didn't even necessarily have to pay out of pocket because we found creative ways for in-kind matching.
Okay. And some community firemen, programs actually manage to make money. Right. Seth Shallett out in California, like he runs a Firewise program that actually generates revenue, right? They would cut down that wood. They would sell that firewood. They would actually end up making a profit.
Right. And for somewhere out there, like that makes sense. Yeah. But for somewhere like, 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐜𝐫𝐢𝐻 County, Colorado, that has like a huge poverty rating, like that.
No, it's a great giveaway.
Yeah. And so again, it's like not utilizing that one size fits all, but like what works for certain communities. And my focus just happens to be more on rural communities because that's also where these fires are starting. And they're gonna take off because, again, there's not a good initial attack system.
In terms of an efficiency, what do you think about, fuel removal versus fuel treatment? Using the use of eco-friendly long-term retardants that can be sprayed at, a rate of 1,000 acres in a day, versus, maybe a mile a week, in a manual fuel reduction.
I think, well, they've been using a lot, like more mastication on those bigger ones. Mastication's been like a huge push, and that's all good and well. I am hesitant on chemicals because even eco-friendly ones, because
actually eco-friendly ones, not the ones that are labeled that way and really aren't.
Well, yeah, because I have quite a few AFGs I'm writing right now, and like 3 of them are related to cancer prevention. And like,
yes,
in my hometown department, like hometown back in Indiana, just lost a firefighter to cancer. Like,
sorry to hear that.
Well, and thanks. But it's like cancer is that number one. It's the number one killer of firefighters now. It's surpassed heart disease. And I had to do a pretty deep dive on pesticides in the agricultural response area for one of my departments. And that going into that information, it makes me hesitant on, and this is where I again say, I think my approach is more focused on long-term sustainability that is not going to have an environmental impact we can't see right now.
Yeah. Okay.
Because our air and our water feels a bit toxic, I
think it's more than a feeling.
Yeah.
To quote Boston. Yeah.
Yeah. Cancer rates are soaring. So it's like, I understand the need and I feel it, but again, that labor that would be required to do that is creating workforce. It's creating jobs.
Right.
In an economy and a job market where I really think we're going to start seeing a shift. I've seen some sociologists refer to Gen Z as like the next tool belt generation, or
The next what?
tool belt
Tool
generation.
belt generation.
Yeah.
If they're lucky, spend a little time playing with tools myself. I love them.
Yeah.
Right? Isn't that what really differentiates humans from the other species that were tool users?
Yeah.
So what's
Yeah.
more human than using a tool?
Exactly. Or just that shift, that shift where we're empowering the blue collar workforce, I think, more, and blue collar jobs. And so my response to that would be, I do believe that we should try to focus on that workforce and use the retardant when we absolutely need to.
Okay. Maybe we'll have like a red collar workforce that refers
Yeah.
specifically to people who work in fire. Do you think there's a nomenclature issue that we call the people firefighters, or we call that agency they work for the fire department? Because these WUI mitigation activities have nothing to do with fire, right? They're fire reduction or risk reduction. Yes, they have something to do with fire, but that if we call it the fire department versus the Department of Fire, because the Department of Fire could be inclusive and it could deal with all of the things that are related to risk reduction, fuels reduction, to evacuation planning, to evacuation route hardening. Like, these are all things that could be under a department that didn't have its sole focus on, we just deal with fire.
Well, and that's where it's like that WUI, I think that WUI term is good. So the Department of the WUI, something, yeah, something like that. And yeah, I that actually is kind of a debate issue I've seen a lot amongst firefighters, is like that term forest technician. And I think a lot of it is because just a lot of those mitigation activities, especially like with the reduction, naturally falls with firefighters, wildland firefighters right now. Those activities are what they do on the line, so they might have to go in with and cut down trees and try to create these little fuel and fire breaks between, to try to catch at their contingency points. But you could also do something as simple as like a preventative dozer line. I see those all around California. Those are huge. There's a lot of concrete steps we can take to reduce the risk using the current workforce. So if we have this sense of urgency, that's where those two need to get together.
Okay.
But in the long term, it is like, we need to find that national interagency for all of this. So I like that they created that, National Intelligence Center for Wildfire or whatever. Is it going to include workforce development? But I do agree with you. It is interesting. And I've seen this conversation starting to come up where it's like, okay, well, everything was under the Forest Service, but risk reduction is more of a FEMA related issue.
Right.
And so emergency, I think it's like, it's all a need for training and wisdom at this point. Like, wildfire, I don't think has been a big part of the conversation. And so now all of a sudden it is within the last couple of years. And firefighters will say, well, it became a conversation when the smoke hit Washington.
They're not wrong.
And they're not wrong.
Right? When it hit New York City, right? And when it enveloped San Francisco, and right when we developed international smoke contamination and the Canadians can't keep their smoke to themselves.
Yes.
So,
yeah. I know.
So
Canadians.
those things all bring other entities into the conversation who thought that this was just a regional issue.
Yes. But if we had been asking firefighters, even after the 1991 Oakland Hills fire or the 2007 Witch fire, or like the Tubbs, campfire, any of these fires, if we would have asked firefighters, hey, you think fires are bigger and faster? They would have been like, absolutely. Like, it's I think part of that issue and why I think this cohesiveness is so important is because we would save so much time if we would listen to the boots on the ground, and we'd save a lot of money, you know?
Right. Yeah. So what's the vehicle by which, we listen?
Um, and I think because I'm not really like I'm not as much of a business person, so I I did write grants for California Public Policy Group. That's like my biggest client right now. They're out of Sacramento. And they have been gracious enough to allow me to like really start working with some of our clients on some of that strategic planning when we're doing grants. So we're right at the beginning of grant season. And I've spent a lot of time leading up to this really talking with my departments and fire chiefs, like, and saying, hey, this is where the funding trends and priorities are. I did a pretty in-depth analysis of award selection for last year's FEMA grants, at least the FSMP and AFG. And so I'm helping fire departments expand their wildfire capacity. And that feels like a good mission. And I'm working, that's like my paying job.
Yeah.
The workforce development and curriculum development is more of, that's a passion project, but working on it pretty actively. And, exploring, looking for partnerships. People ask, like, why don't, have you taken it to the Forest Service? And I haven't, and I don't plan on it because I don't, again, it's focused on giving kids a livable wage out of high school and not necessarily going into a program where they are still going to be strapped financially.
Okay.
So
when they get out of high school with this envisioned training, then what are the job opportunities that are open to them, and what do those jobs pay?
there are a lot of contractor positions, and it's not that we would dissuade them from going anywhere. I think we need to have an interagency career fair in the spring or in the fall.
What a great idea.
So, it's like, guys, this is not as hard as this seems. Except for like finding, again, those sponsors, because everyone's so focused on their section of wildfire. So,
right.
But either way, I think having like an interagency, and part of the curriculum is saying, here are all your options. If you want to go into the private contract world, you're going to get paid more, but it's, these are the disadvantages to that. Here, the pros and cons of all of it, I think. And I think there is more room for this industry to be privatized in that sense, like,
Absolutely.
and not to go one way or another, but like insurance companies, bring your own brigade.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if you follow the economics of wildfire, they're completely misaligned with the incentive of putting out fire, right? Emotionally, yes, and morally, everyone wants to put out the fire. Financially, everyone makes more money the longer the fire goes, right?
Mm-hmm.
More overtime for the firefighters, more suppressant souls, more aerial drops, more dozer line put in, more meals, more everything on a bigger, more destructive fire.
Yeah.
Except that unless you're the insurance company and you're the ones who end up picking up the tab for all this. So I'm wondering why the insurance companies aren't getting more involved in the suppression efforts, basically, so that they can mitigate their liability hands-on themselves, not just hope that the department, puts out the woods before their asset burns up.
Yes, and what you just said is like my whole point is, like, if you put money into these fire departments, some of these bigger companies, like, put money into that workforce development, put money into developing resiliency in your most vulnerable communities, And then it's also going to shift that liability on the community. We gave you money. We gave you workforce. You have to figure it out now.
Yes. Yes. So got a question. If all of it seems like your client base is mostly California. What keeps you in the Denver area?
I love, and it's funny you asked this, because I've been like in and out of Colorado for various reasons. In 2021, I spent like a good chunk of, like, I want to say 4 or 5 months on the fire line. So Montana, California, all of that. And after that, I was like, well, I'm going to go wherever the wind takes me. And the wind brought me back to Colorado.
Okay.
And then I, spent a lot of 2023 and part of 2024 in Indiana, actually, after, a family emergency. And again, was like, well, I think, actually, I'm going to go check out California and check out some of these other places. And, I feel like Colorado has all of the things that I personally really love. It has a lot of public land you can access. Like I can drive down the road in the mountains and get out and go climb whatever, is right there. You can't really do that in California.
Because the lands aren't public, or because it takes 7 hours to get 20 miles?
Both. So it doesn't seem like there's a lot of public land in California, which is also, I think, part of their wildfire problem, and that's a bigger, I think, deeper conversation. But I love snowboarding. It's got great snowboarding. And I've got family here and friends. I've kind of built a second life and home in Colorado. So I just really enjoy it. I would like to, and I'm hoping to expand this project and expand my scope of work in Colorado. Yeah. But it is kind of like, especially right now, it's getting into my busy season where it's like 60, 70-hour work weeks. And then, I don't know, maybe I've thought about even trying to sign up as a reserve wildland firefighter. I might go fight wildfire this summer. It's kind of just waiting to see if we can get the support and the additional capacity and funding we need to really launch the program. Yeah. So it's, I enjoy doing things like this where I can talk a little bit more about, hey, this is why I feel the way I feel. It's like really, I don't think it's as narrow as it sounds. I think that I've thought about this damn thing so much that I have landed on like, okay, no, really, guys, I think we need to just focus some of it. You don't have to focus all of it. That's part of our issue. We have a tend to go towards extremism. Just put a little bit of it into this focus. Yeah. And we would be unstoppable.
So is there a school that's a likely candidate for a pilot program with you?
Yes, actually, there are a few areas within Colorado. There will hopefully be one in the Denver metro area. But when looking at pilot sites, I looked at wildfire vulnerability. Then I also looked at like dropout rates, and what the need is for that alternative pathway. And then you look at other, what is the infrastructure for the grid out there? Like, how old is that equipment? What is the logging? So you look for all of those vulnerabilities, because that's also going to let you know how much workforce you can develop. So if this approach is successful, then we can expand it to other areas and stakeholders involved in wildfire, like utility companies and the logging industry. So we're, hopefully it will be a jumping off point to create some of that cohesion. But the areas are they're kind of spread out throughout Colorado. The first cohort, we're hoping for about 100 students.
Okay, that's a lot.
It is, but it seems pretty reasonable, I think, because when I crunched the numbers for Colorado, the theoretical need for an alternative program, that potential impact would be like over 110,000 students.
Wow.
So
huge.
Yeah. So even being able to say, hey, this is something that's working for communities and students. Let's put more focus on this even, you know?
Yeah.
So that seems pretty reasonable. The instructor portion it's been an interesting conversation, because it's like, okay, well, where are you going to house it? Okay, you can house it in a school or you can house it in a fire department. We know that schools kind of have their own stuff going on and they're overwhelmed. So we wanted to create a curriculum that could be implemented by fire personnel.
Okay.
Yeah. But there and again, you only have so many fire departments with wildland training, let alone the ability to train the trainer kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I've started contacting contractors that I know are qualified to teach this.
Okay.
And I have one area that I feel particularly confident about, just because I know that area so well. But I've yet to encounter a firefighter, private, public, which way or another, who isn't excited about the idea of working with kids.
Yeah, no, it's a great idea. I would think that given that the Marshall Fire happened in Boulder County, the Boulder Valley School District would be pretty excited to hear about a program like this.
Yeah, we've chatted with Boulder, you know, and hopefully there will be something there. I think it's more of we also want to make sure that we're getting in places that have maybe less resources.
Mm-hmm.
So
although more resources could make it easier to get your pilot program done.
That is true.
Traction, and then you take it, to other places.
That is very true. Yeah. And I think there will hopefully be some potential there. It would be a good spot. It's even getting the people that would be qualified, like to train the kids. But yeah, no, that's a good thought for sure.
I'd love to see the curriculum. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, and I'll totally send it to you. We've got a lot of the suppression portion is based on like the NWCG, but we've like expanded it. And then for example, they do like a lesson, like a lesson in, I think it's S190 or L180, about the South Canyon incident in 1994 in Glenwood Springs. We expand that into a book study on Fire on a Mountain. Because then you can really kind of also break it down after you've had those lessons. Then you can break it down even further when you have like the whole story. And then we want to develop a really comprehensive PTSD prevention unit.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, and that was kind of more as like the teacher side of me. It's like, I don't feel good sending kids, especially ones that might be like at risk and already have some trauma experience, into an environment where that trauma behavior might thrive. So we've got some people that we're talking to about that curriculum, like what that would actually look like within it. But what we've kind of also realized is, like, when you're developing a curriculum, usually the state has a set of academic standards
that
guide you, right? So even going back, and what we're working on now is creating a comprehensive set of standards that will house, so like PTSD preventions and holistic health and wellness. So like they're going to talk about, personal fitness, and they'll have a personal fitness plan that they'll have to track, and a student task book, which is all designed after like the expectations they'll have as a wildland firefighter. But those are going to be like life safety and prevention standards.
Okay.
And then you've got like a whole set of, community risk reduction. So having a curriculum baseline that can be modified, but also having like a set of standards that can help guide. So we want it to be something that can really be modified if need be for the communities, because again, what it's going to look like for Boulder, it would be different than what it would look like for Denver versus what it would look like in Saguache.
Yeah, right. And given that schools, they're still influenced by this, teach to the test concept. Are you doing an alignment where okay, well, the wildfire program satisfies, this aspect of chemistry, this aspect, right? How the students are going to get credit for the things that they have to take through the program.
Well, so we originally designed it as a 2-year CTE program.
Okay.
But then very quickly again ran into who's going to teach this, what's the licensure going to look like, and I think that's going to have to be a bigger conversation. And so what we did again was make it so it can be delivered by anyone within the industry. Like anyone, the school can use it if they want to, but we didn't want that put all of our eggs in that education basket, because they're so overwhelmed.
Sure.
And
I remember, in the early 80s, you had to be a cardiologist to teach CPR.
Yeah.
Okay. The CPR adoption was really low. And when they found out, hey, in 4 hours, we could teach anyone to teach this, push the play button, right? Observe the mannequin, blah, blah, blah. Now everybody knows CPR. So similarly, like, let's not set a credential for teaching this that is wildly unnecessary for the kids to master the content.
Yeah. And in that sense as well, it could be taught by different people, so like the fire, even if you were like really desperate and like, hey, we can't find like a good wildfire instructor that will teach the whole suppression unit, send them to fire camp in Salida. And then when they come back with the program, we'll teach the other parts of it, so getting, being able to work and get creative for what you have available and what is needed. But yeah, I think having just seeing all of it together, I think is going to be helpful. How will this work?
I want to turn your camera around. I want to see the big whiteboard in your house.
Oh, yeah, I just recently moved in. I had to go to California for a month, and so I don't have my whiteboard up. But people I end up talking to, they're like, I wish I could be with you in front of a whiteboard,
right?
Which was how I used to teach.
Fit together.
Yeah.
Rachelle, we have way more to talk about. We're out of time for today, but let's continue this conversation shortly. And what you're working on is absolutely fascinating and so necessary. And thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, and I appreciate getting the chance to chat a little bit more about it, and I think maybe help understand like where that mentality of like, oh guys, I'm really nervous about where we're going comes from.
If folks would like to get your help or help you, what's the best way to reach you?
You can reach me at rwilson@foxfirewui.org. or our
firewoo.org. And I'll post a link to your LinkedIn page on here as well.
Yeah, and I'm undergoing, because again, I'm not a business person, so I'm like trying to switch website platforms in the middle of the AFG, which we have 10 days before that deadline. So
all right,
LinkedIn and email is the best way to get a hold of me, and I will post updates on the website through LinkedIn.
Wonderful. I'll send a link over. Rachelle Wilson doing amazing work to develop the workforce and comprehensive strategy towards WUI management and the risks thereof. You've been watching or listening to The Fire Break. I'm Steve Wolf. We're sponsored by Team Wildfire. And we'll see you at the next one. Until then, take care.